Hi guys, you would imagine somebody who ran a party called the United Kingdom Independence Party would understand what independence means. You would imagine somebody who had been banging on about independence, not just for years, but for literal decades. You would imagine that person would understand what independence means. Well, that's clearly not the case, because Nigel Farage doesn't understand the word independence, and he's going to demonstrate it in this video. He's going to attack the SNP for what he calls fake independence. So let's hear what he had to say.
The return of Alex Salmond to the political fray has led to people saying to me, well, Nigel, it's like you, isn't it? He's doing the same thing you did when you launched the Brexit Party back in the spring of 2019. Well, I would like to think that my reputation wasn't under quite as much of a cloud as Alex.
I don't actually know who is worse, Nigel Farage or Alex Salmond. Alex Salmond has been doing some dodgy things with women, and Nigel Farage has been doing some dodgy things with the country. He has sold the country a lie. He's been a charlatan and a snake oil salesman for decades. So I don't know how you balance these two things out. They are pretty much apples and oranges, but both of them are pretty bad.
Salmond's currently is, although I suppose to the metropolitan elite, I was the devil.
Do I put myself in the position of the metropolitan elite? Please tell me in the comment section if you believe that I am a member of the metropolitan elite.
But my whole political career was about one thing. You know, I was there at the birth of the UK Independence Party, and I fought for independence for all those decades, to be outside of control and foreign domination.
Wow, out of control of foreign domination. So, of course, he's talking about the European Union here. But, Nigel, the UK, if you want to call it domination, is under domination, under the domination of other entities, other organizations. If we look here at, as I leave this link in the description, but you can find this information yourself quite easily. These are the organizations the UK is part of. This information was last updated on the 27th of November 2020, but I think it's still quite valid, apart from the EU and maybe a few others. But it says here the UK is a member of these organizations. We can see here the United Nations, UNESCO, the WHO. We can also see ICC. We can see G5, G7, G8, G10, G20, NATO. There are a number of organizations here. Paris Club. I don't know how relevant some of these are today because the UK has left the European Union. But the UK, Interpol, we can see also, the UK is part of these organizations. So it has to follow the rules of these organizations. So is Nigel Farage saying that the UK is independent or is not independent? I'm confused.
To be free to make our own decisions. Alex Salmond has been doing this for a decade longer than me, and he too is fighting for independence. And Nicola Sturgeon is fighting for independence. That's the word they use all the time. The BBC use it all the time. Everyone says it's about Scottish independence, but it's not. It's fake. It's a sham, and it needs to be completely and utterly exposed. Both of these characters are card-carrying EU fanatics. They want Scotland to be a member of the European Union. So,
what's wrong with that? The largest trading bloc in the world. They want to be part of the largest trading bloc in the world. What's wrong with that? You call it fanaticism. I call it pragmatism.
Out of the UK, but in the European Union. You can't be an independent country if you're in the European Union.
So once again, I'm confused. You can't be an independent country if you're part of the European Union. So you can be an independent country and be part of NATO, G7, all of these organizations. But as just the EU is the problem. You can't be an independent country. But then let's expand this to other countries. So is Nigel saying that Germany is not an independent country? Is he saying that Spain, France, the Netherlands, Ireland, these are not independent countries? I'd like you to explain to these countries that they're not independent and how they're not independent.
Because they make your laws and their courts decide what is right and what is wrong. And this is a complete and utter con that is being...
I wonder, is Nigel a member of any organisation, like a tennis club or a golf club? Does he understand that when you're a member of that organisation, you have to follow the rules? If you break the rules, there are consequences. If Nigel goes to play golf at midnight at his local golf club when it's closed, they'll probably come out and tell him, you need to go home. And he says, I want to play golf at midnight. And they say, I'm sorry, you can't. The gate is locked. You climbed over the gate or whatever. You can't do this. It's against the rules. Is Nigel Farage part of any organisation or club where you have to follow rules? Or is he a complete, I don't know what?
Put upon the Scottish people. Now, I did try, going back 7 or 8 years, I tried to go up to Edinburgh, told the press I was coming, and my intention was to try and blow this word apart, to try and make...
Yes, where do you hear this?
People realise it wasn't independence. I was attacked by a mob in the street. It was pretty nasty. I got to tell you, these extreme Scot Nats are the real boot boys. I mean, they're not nice. And then the police came along, and for my own safety, locked me in a pub. And a couple of the regulars said it was the most exciting thing that had happened for years.
Now, I heard a different story. I heard that he had to hide in a pub. Not that the police told him to hide in a pub. But that's a bit of a quibble. Now, just think about it for a moment. You have an English nationalist coming up to Scotland and telling the Scots that they're wrong. A guy who has been selling snake oil to the public arrives in Scotland and tells the Scottish people, what you think is wrong. I know what's right, and I'm here to educate you. Of course they reacted in the way that they did. Although it's interesting that he had this experience in Edinburgh, not in Glasgow. It would have been interesting how he would have been treated if he had gone to Glasgow.
So my attempt to try and have a debate about what independence meant got nowhere. But the SNP is very, very split on this. Because if you really are a Scottish nationalist, you wouldn't want to be in the United Kingdom or indeed inside the European Union. Now, it's not...
Now, yes, he's actually right here, and I've talked about this before, how Nigel Farage is able to mix the truth with fiction. He's right here. The Scottish National Party is somewhat split. Now, I don't know how split it is. He's saying it's very split, but of course he would say that. But there are members of the SNP who don't want an independent Scotland to join the European Union. They definitely want the UK dissolved. They want Scotland out. But some of them don't want to join the European Union. I think those people don't understand reality. I'm not trying to be disingenuous here, but if an independent Scotland who would it trade with? If it wants to trade with the European Union, it would make sense to be a part of the European Union. Scotland has benefited a great deal through EU membership. So throwing that away, I think, would be a problem.
Not something I support, but it would be at least an intellectually honest opinion. When the referendum came in 2014 about separating from the UK, Salmon really only got into trouble when it became clear that to rejoin the European Union would mean signing a treaty, committing Scotland to joining the euro, and people...
Now, that's not a guarantee. It's probable that Scotland, if they wanted to join the European Union, they would have to join the euro. But it's not necessarily the case. Now, of course, Brexiteers will say this: you have to join you have to join the euro. But we don't have a universe we can test this in. We don't know until Scotland becomes independent. There's no requirement for Scotland to join the euro until Scotland actually becomes independent. This is an argument. It's more of a hypothetical you're engaging in here, not a real argument. We need to see Scotland independent first, and then we can see if it's necessary for an independent Scotland to join the euro. But anyway, what is the problem with joining the euro? I know for Brexiteers it's the devil, but really, what is the problem with joining the euro?
I looked at that and thought, no thank you, we're not having any of it. And when the big referendum, the nationwide referendum, came in 2016, a third of SNP voters voted Brexit, voted leave. So there's the potential there for a split, not just a split between Salmond and Sturgeon, but a...
Notice that he talks about 2016. He's not talking about today. I'd like to know how many people within the SNP today support Brexit, continue to support Brexit. I think a large number of people who perhaps voted in 2016 for Brexit, he said a third. I think that number is much smaller today. It is probably still a significant number. Of course, there are people within the SNP or within the independence movement who don't want anything to do with the EU. I don't understand the reasoning behind that, but I'm sure they exist. Of course they exist. They exist everywhere.
A split within the ranks of the nationalist movement. Now, I know...
But I think Nigel here is putting the cart before the horse, because for these people, independence is more important than joining the European Union. Scotland would have to become independent first. Then it would join the European Union. It's not Scotland becomes a member of the European Union and then becomes independent. So you're trying to sell people, don't become independent because there's a possibility Scotland would become a member of the European Union. I don't think you're going to be able to sell that to anyone in the SNP, because they're first and foremost, they want independence from the UK. What comes after is a decision of the subsequential Scottish government, which may not actually be the SNP.
There are some of you watching this in England who think, you know what, we're so bored with the Scots, we don't care if they go. But I would say this to you, if they are going to break away from the UK, if they are going to vote for what they think is independence, they jolly well ought to know that actually it isn't. They need to have the truth put before them.
Sorry, I can hear a massive crashing sound upstairs. I think it's my neighbour. No, it's my ironic meter going off the scale here. Nigel Farage is telling people you need to know before you vote for something, you need to know what you're voting for. The guy who has been telling people that leaving the European Union would be a cakewalk. We'd be able to have our cake and eat it. Of course, he didn't say that, but he said something to that, on that line. Somebody who was saying that, they need us more than we need them. This sort of rhetoric that he's been always pumping out since the 1990s. We need to leave in order to become independent. We'll be able to control our waters, be able to sell into the EU. They need, we sell so much to them. They sell so much to us. They're not going to give us a bad trade deal. We can have whatever we want. This is the guy who's been selling this idea for decades. And now he's saying that the Scots need to be informed before they vote. Really?
So I think there's a massive political opportunity here. And yet, nobody in Scotland is filling it, least of all the Scottish Conservatives. Why? Well, the Scottish Conservatives aren't even conservative, aren't even vaguely conservative. And of course, they're Remainers. Even Ruth Davidson, who led them for a bit, and certainly she had personality. But she was a Remainer, so she was never, ever able to attack the word independence.
Once again, Nigel Farage doesn't understand the word independence. What does independence mean to Nigel Farage? It just means out of the EU. It doesn't mean out of NATO. It doesn't mean out of the UN, or maybe it does. But he hasn't said that the UK is... he hasn't denied, or he hasn't said that the UK is not an independent nation. He said once we're out of the EU, now we're independent. But the UK, as I said, is part of the WTO, it's part of NATO, it's part of the G5, G7. There are a number of organisations here that the UK is part of. It follows the rules of these organisations. But just when it comes to the EU, that means independence. Okay.
She didn't want the UK to have its independence. It's actually now a complete open goal. Sturgeon wanted Scotland to stay part of the EU vaccine programme. Sturgeon wanted Scotland to be part of the European Medicines Agency. If Sturgeon had had her way, thousands more people would have died in Scotland.
Now, you have no evidence to support that claim. But he doesn't need evidence to support that claim. isn't it interesting how Nigel Farage is not mentioning the 21 million vaccines that were sent from the European Union to the UK? No thanks to the organizations within the European Union. Thank you very much, European Union, for sending these vaccines over to us. Of course, it wasn't the European Union itself, it was the companies within the European Union. But when it comes to attacking, when there's a problem, it's the EU's fault. When something goes well, it's because it's despite the EU.
So what it needs, for those that want to save the Union, what it needs is an outright attack on this total fake misuse of the word independence.
Once again, somebody who doesn't understand independence is trying to sell independence.
To cast doubt in the minds of nationalist voters. The divisions are there already. We can drive them even wider, making the Scottish people realise that whatever Salmond and Sturgeon are offering is not independence, is the way to save the Union. And I hope in Downing Street they listen and understand this message.
So it's not about the Scottish people. He doesn't care about the Scottish people. It's about convincing the Scottish people to vote for the Union. It's about convincing the Scottish people to vote against their own interests. He hasn't actually presented a valid reason to defend the Union. His entire video was about attacking the SNP, attacking some concept of independence that is unrelated to reality. But then, once again, Nigel Farage is famous for selling snake oil, about convincing people to vote for something they don't understand, and they will suffer the consequences. If the Scottish people vote against independence, they have people like Nigel Farage to thank. They have people like Boris Johnson to thank. How is the life of ordinary Scottish people going to improve under another Tory government? How is it going to get better? This is their opportunity to break away from the Tories. You have to remember, the Scottish people have no power in Westminster. If the Tories are in charge, they don't give a crap about Scotland. If Labour is in charge, they give a bit more of a crap about Scotland. But we're looking at a Labour Party completely defeated, and we're going to see probably more and more Conservative governments who don't care about Scotland. You have to provide some sort of benefit to the Scottish people, Nigel, but you're not. You're just attacking the idea of them wanting to be free. Let me know in the comments section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?